This video is sponsored by War Thunder. Stay tuned. When we think about iconic competitive Pokemon, Landorus T and a certain cat often comes to mind, but make no mistake, his brother Thundurus is also one of the most accomplished competitive Pokemon in its own right, as you can tell by the length of this video that you just clicked. So to tackle this monster, we here at FSG decided to enlist the help of a Thundurus expert.
What is going on, everybody? You got Blunder here, government name Thunder Blunder, and today we're going to be going over my guy Thundurus. It's a genie of such coolness, and it has an electrifying presence that is so intimidating that FSG had to call me over to help. Thundurus is one of Black and White's three forces of nature, summoning lightning so powerful that it would make Thor himself shudder.
We're going to find out if this translated to competitive success, with Blunder covering the singles metagames for Thundurus and myself covering its many VGC appearances. And so we ask, how great was Thundurus actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats.
So we start with Pokemon Black and White. Thundurus was one of the scariest Pokemon in Generation 5 right out the gate. It had several unique traits that let it pose a threat to just about every team out there. First off, it had a terrific speed tier of 111. This let it get the jump on nearly the entire offensive metagame as it outran Pokemon that were already considered in the upper echelons of speed, such as Latios, Terrakion, and Garchomp. This meant that Thundurus was of excellent use against offensive teams, but it was also incredibly dangerous for defensive teams as well, since it had Nasty Plot to boost its already high special attack stat into the stratosphere and dominate common bulky Pokemon like Jellicent and Gliscor. The main reason it was so terrifying though was that it was blessed with Focus Blast for basically perfect coverage. This let it smash Pokemon that would otherwise check its Thunderbolt and Hidden Power Ice combination, even after a Nasty Plot boost, such as Ferrothorn, Tyranitar, Excadrill, and specially defensive Heatran. Many players ended up relying on specially defensive Jirachi and its 60% Body Slam paralysis chance to stop Thundurus, but Thundurus adapted and started using Lumberry, and Jirachi just became setup fodder, as did Chansey and Blissey on Rain stall teams. The great thing about Thundurus was that its one set of Nasty Plot 3 attacks was tremendous against both offense and defense, meaning it never had to compromise and risk matchup in either direction. That being said, it could absolutely mix it up and find great results. Since Thunderbolt and Hidden Power Ice has such great coverage already, and Thundurus was so strong, it could sometimes get by without even using Focus Blast. For instance, when Gastrodon rose in popularity as one of the few Pokemon capable of checking standard Thundurus, Thundurus could simply just Grass Knot it. The same could be said for the brand new Unaware Quagsire that was a staple on stall teams at the time. Grass Knot also allowed for a safer hit on Tyranitar, and was unaffected by Chople Berry, which Tyranitar often ran mostly for Thundurus. Thundurus could also run Taunt and Substitute to great effect. The former was incredible at shutting down Deoxys speed lead sets as well as stopping Chansey's healing against stall, while the latter could help it often achieve 2 KOs or more, as usually opponents opted to sacrifice one of their Pokemon to Thundurus before attempting a revenge kill. Thundurus made the most out of both moves' utility and was able to taunt something as fast as Deoxys speed because it had priority on them thanks to its Prankster ability, which leads us to its most infamous non-Nasty Plot set, Thunder Wave, which infuriated many a player. It would ruin any non-Landorus Choice Scarfer's utility for the rest of the battle, particularly maiming Scarf Terrakion, Politoed, and Tyranitar, while also being a perfect panic button counter to Pokemon with speed boosts such as Chlorophyll Venusaur and Quiverdance Volcarona, thus making it particularly nasty against Sun teams. Speaking of which, Thundurus was amazing on both Rain and Sand teams. Rain allowed it to run its most powerful stab move, Thunder, without the drawback of the mediocre accuracy. Rain teams also had the option of 2 excellent spinners in Starmie and Tentacruel to alleviate Thundurus' Stealth Rock weakness. Thundurus' high speed and power meant it fit right in on fast-paced offensive Rain teams. It was crucial in breaking tougher defensive teams with Nasty Plot or checking dangerous offensive threats with Thunder Wave. It really did it all for offensive Rain and was a member almost as quintessential as Ferrothorn. As for Sand, Thundurus greatly appreciated Excadrill's unblockable rapid spin support. Its own ability to severely threaten the majority of opposing Sand teams often let Excadrill clean up against them with ease, and its ability to crush Rain teams helped Sand win the Weather War. Plus, Thundurus' own high natural speed and coverage meant it could turn dangerous wall breakers such as Landorus, Garchomp, and Terrakion into their own offensive onslaught, which was an absolute godsend for the generally more slow-paced Sand teams. Thundurus was unbelievably good, and for quite a long time many of the Pokemon Black and White player base complained of its brokenness. It was too fast, too strong, and just straight up too difficult to counter. Its straightforward Nasty Plot 3 attack set was already too good, but when one mixed in all its viable support options, it was just ridiculously overwhelming. Thus, Thundurus was eventually banned from Pokemon Black and White OU. Then, Black and White 2 came out, and Thundurus gained its Therian form as opposed to its original Incarnate form. Therian found itself in OU as it lost Incarnate's incredible base speed. Its 101 base was definitely still quite a good stat to have, as we'd seen this before with Landorus Incarnate, but this Thundurus no longer outran Latios, Terrakion, Garchomp, and possibly most importantly, a brand new Pokemon, the incredibly menacing and metagame defining Keldeo. This meant it could not threaten offense nearly as easily, and since Black and White 2 was all about offense, Thundurus was not nearly as effortlessly dangerous against the metagame as its Incarnate form was. However, it could not be discounted as a threat. Its new ability Volt Absorb let it block Volt Switch, which was incredibly useful given how difficult to deal with Rotom Wash could be for rain teams. Nevertheless, the real story was that it gained an absolutely staggering base 145 special attack stat, which isn't too far away from Kyogre, and Thundurus could also use agility to patch its speed. While it wasn't going to be able to spray its attacks all around the battle as easy as Incarnate was, it could bypass all the aforementioned Pokemon, which was greatly rewarding, as even with a Choice Scarf, these Pokemon could not outspeed a boosted Thundurus Therian. Thundurus had less opportunities to switch in due to its worse speed, but once it got that free turn, such as against a Scarfed Earthquake or Secret Sword, it was potentially game over, given how its absolute strength let it OHKO so much of the metagame. Initially, it ran Nasty Plot alongside agility, so it could appropriately threaten defensive teams as well as offense, but as the metagame shifted away from hard stall, it became quite clear that Focus Blast was the superior fourth move, as it let Thundurus maximize the amount of matchups it could potentially win as soon as it grabbed that agility boost, which was quite a lot, given how many standard rain and sand teams crumpled to its power and coverage, Focus Blast's accuracy willing. Oftentimes, all it took was baiting the opposing Latios into losing about 45% of its health, which wasn't at all difficult with one of Thundurus' favorite partners, Keldeo, and then the entire team would be swept as a result. The Substitute 3 attack set was also quite vicious, as some players preferred a more hit and run approach with Thundurus as opposed to an all-out sweeping set, and Substitute was able to accomplish this very nicely, guarding against revenge killing and making it easy to maximize the impact of its attacks. It was especially nice against Amoonguss, who could no longer status it and often couldn't break the Substitute either. It also blocked Ferrothorn's Leech Seed, making Protect stalling a lot more difficult. Thundurus' lower speed meant it didn't offer nearly as much to Sand as Incarnate did, since now it was unable to instantly threaten Garchomp, Terrakion, and Keldeo, and the lack of Sandrush Excadrill to capitalize on its wall breaking didn't help either, meaning it didn't see much use on sand teams. However, it was once again one of Rain offense's most dangerous Pokemon, being one of the Pokemon that most defined that style of team's play. It was their best weapon at breaking through suffocating sand cores, and it did so very well. Its speed was more than fast enough to outspeed mostly every Pokemon that these teams packed after one agility, and thanks to Rain giving Thunder perfect accuracy, they could not switch into Thundurus' attacks at all. Overall, Thundurus in both its forms was one of the scariest, most important Pokemon of the 5th generation, shaping the metagame and creating its victims a fear of thunderstorms.
And so we arrive to the other half of the genies of healthy meta. Now that we're covering both of them, good luck and prosperity will come to you, as it did to most people who use Thundurus. I know we just covered Landorus, but let me just say, Thundurus may be the most important Pokemon in VGC history, and to find out just exactly why, you'll need to keep watching. Heh. From the moment Thundurus was available, it was guaranteed a spot at the top of VGC. Its legendary stats and typing would have probably been enough to make it a tier 1 threat on its own, especially in 2011's Unova Dex limited meta. It was easily the best electric type in the format. 125 base special attack tied it for 3rd highest in all of the usable Unova mons, and it could use Hidden Power Ice as a coverage move alongside Thunderbolt to create pseudo Bolt Beam coverage. Thundurus could lean towards its other typing and fiddle with Hidden Power to create a much needed stab flying move. Thundurus' defensive typing already made it hard to deal with for the many fighting types that populated 2011, such as Scrafty and Conkeldurr. When you put a flying stab on top of that, Thundurus became a threat that was impossible to ignore. But that's before we get to the sweetest part of the package. The thing that set Thundurus apart, that ensured Thundurus would be relevant long after 2011, that will cement Thundurus as one of the most notorious Pokemon to ever touch VGC, and maybe, just maybe, means it could contend for the title of greatest VGC Pokemon of all time. I'm talking, of course, about Prankster. Now you might be thinking, Prankster isn't even exclusive to Thundurus. Heck, even its fellow genie Tornadus gets it, and that thing gets Tailwind. While that might be true, the merit of Thundurus' electric typing gave it access to a unique combo its fellow genie didn't have, Prankster Thunderwave. As forms of speed control go, Thunderwave is one of the most reliable. While Tailwind and Trick Room serve as team-wide buffs, their limited duration means you have to make the most of the turns they're active. Paralysis, on the other hand, is a permanent debuff barring some strange aromatherapy shenanigans that that you never see in VGC, and it was arguably even stronger speed control than Tailwind. Keep in mind that in Generation 5, Paralysis was still a 75% speed increase, and that's all before you consider the chance to lose your turn. With Prankster, Thundurus could operate equally well in and out of Trick Room, if your opponent even got it set up. Prankster Taunt meant that you could often preempt any setup attempts, as well as other more out there strategies. Heck, you could even run Prankster Rain Dance to suddenly turn the skies in your favor. With best-in-class utility and incredible offense, Thundurus was arguably the best Pokemon in VGC 2011, especially when paired with its fellow Genie Tornadus. Thundurus generally preferred two one-time use items, either Electric Gem for a surge of offensive power, or Charity Berry to handle the rock slides that might be thrown its way. Most trainers use both to facilitate its offensive output, and for most of the season, that worked just fine. Offensive Thundurus was a frequent sight at any high-level tournament. Around the globe, it racked up gold medals at national championships, courtesy of Wolf Glick in the US, Francesco Pardini in Italy, and Guillermo Castilla Diaz in Spain. The best players from around the globe descended on San Diego, each with their Thundurus in tow, and that was when Ray Rizzle changed everything. A staggering 7 of the top 8 teams at Worlds had Thundurus. There was some variety in the items and moves, sure. Both Wolf Glick and silver medalist Mateo Genie opted for a substitute Thundurus and Hidden Power Flying, and Wolf rolled up with a Flying Gem. But when it came to how they were trained, they were all the same. 252 special attack, 252 speed, modest or timid. And then at the very top you have Ray with a bold nature, only 4 EVs, 20 special attack, and all the rest dumped into bulk. While everyone else prioritizes Thundurus' ability to hit hard, Ray optimized Thundurus' utility. Ray's bulky Thundurus was tailored to destroy the physically based metagame, shrugging off fighting moves and even rock slides thanks to the Charity Berry, allowing Ray to spread Thunderwave to his heart's content. Just take a look at this moment from the finals where his Thundurus absolutely tanks a Flying Gem boosted Acro from its fellow Genie, allowing Ray to get off his Thunderbolt, winning the game, securing the second of his 3 consecutive championships, and changing the way we would play competitive VGC forever. The shift to a national dex format in 2012 somewhat loosens Thundurus' grip on the metagame, but it was still one of the meta's elite threats. It had to keep an eye out for new counters, such as Tyranitar and Yachtberry Garchomp, but by the same ilk, it was hard to find a Pokemon that didn't appreciate the ability to slow down opponents and shut down chi strats pretty much at will. With the new year came new knowledge. By now, bulky Thundurus was all the rage. However, with the community's eyes open to the possibilities enabled by bulk, they were able to innovate their own takes on the concept. The most notable of these iterations came from none other than Aaron's Cybertron Zang. While Ray's Thundurus had been designed to handle a mostly physically oriented metagame, Aaron adapted his Thundurus to fit a year that was filled with Dragon Gem Dracometers anywhere you looked. His calm, specially defensive Thundurus was designed to always live a timid Dragon Gem boosted Dracometer from Latios, pretty much the most powerful common special attack in the meta. Aaron also outfitted his Thundurus with one new tool befitting its bulk, a Citrus Berry. Aaron won the US Nationals in the seniors division, and his build took off like wildfire, becoming the most common spread of the year. Thundurus' moveset stayed mostly the same. In fact, Hidden Power Ice became even more popular due to the infestation of dragon types. There was one move that started to crop up more: Swagger. Swagger was especially popular in Japan. In fact, so popular that Japanese players started to incorporate it into their in-game greetings in one simple way: Swagger is God. Haha, what a funny joke for now. That's not to say that other types of Thundurus didn't crop up. Baris Bia Akos went top 8 at the Italian Nationals by finding a spot for Thundurus on a rain team. As befits its origins, Thundurus thrives in stormy conditions, making it a fearsome Pokemon both as a facilitator of and counter to rain. In the rain, it could handle grass types with hidden power and drop monstrous 100 accuracy Thunders. Outside of rain, it slowed down swift swimmers and threatened them with its own electric stab. Keep this pairing in mind. We'll see more of it as the years go on. Matthew Enfuego Coyle repeated his world's top 8 from the year prior with his own rain-based Thundurus, becoming one of 5 top cut players to bring the Genie in 2011. 7th place finisher Guillermo Castilla Diaz and 5th placer Seijin Park also used Thundurus, as did 2 players of the podium that year: bronze medalist Abel Flash Martin Sands and runner-up Wolf Glick, though now 3-time champion Ray Rizzle went without the Pokemon that had defined his previous Worlds run, while Wolf used a very standard Electric Gem Thundurus with a build that was near identical to Aaron's national winning team. Flash actually went against the current, which, if bulky Thundurus had originally also been against the current, I guess means he was just going back to normal. Either way, Flash opted for a fast, modest Thundurus with substitute and a flying gem. 2013 introduced a new toy for Thundurus to play, its Therian form, which sacrificed a little bit of speed and bulk plus prankster utility for the highest special attack stat allowed in the format and a new ability in Volt Absorb. But since Thundurus had been trending bulky for a while anyways, you can probably guess that Incarnate still remained the favorite Thundurus du jour. Therian had its uses, but we'll get to those in a sec. The advent of Therian forms did actually have a big impact on Thundurus, but it was because of the introduction of Landorus Therian. While Scarf versions could outspeed and threaten Thundurus with a Rock Slide, Thundurus naturally outspeeds Landorus Therian, meaning it could often dodge Earthquake and fire back with a devastating hidden power Ice. So in a way, Therians did help out Thundurus, because it was one of the single best Landorus answers in the format, as well as one of its best partners for its ability to handle the bulky water types that could stymie Landorus. The only thing it didn't appreciate was a new ground type running around and soaking up Thunder Waves. Thundurus's bigger problems came from the popularity of teams using Cresselia with Tyranitar. While Thundurus actually was a common choice on these teams as a way to deal with rain, it found itself hard-pressed to make any offensive headway. Nevertheless, Thundurus secured its stalwart status as a strategic status spreader. It hovered around top 5 on usage, was a frequent sight in top 8s, and even put a number of good tournament wins. Zach Bravurius Droid Comp took first place in the March International Challenge, and the Genie siblings Mateo and Alberto won Milan and Bochum regionals respectively. Sejun Park also used a fun Liepard Breloom Thundurus Scizor team to win the Korean Nationals. I now want to take you on a journey of a single player for the 2013 season, Aaron Zhang. To put it simply, it's impossible to talk about Thundurus without talking about Aaron, and even if you know why that's going to be the case, there might be some additional nuance you don't know. It was Aaron's first year in Masters, and after an incredible few years in Seniors, he was determined to leave his mark. Aaron actually used Thundurus for most of the season, piloting his 2012 Nationals winning team, but when he found himself needing champion points later on to qualify for Worlds, he used an edited version of Sejun's Korean Nationals team to win the Massachusetts Regionals. This Thundurus used Swagger, which Aaron paired with Liepard Foul Play for potential huge damage on opponents. For Nationals, however, Aaron knew players would be expecting Liepard Breloom. Thundurus itself was a great counter to Breloom due to its typing. Aaron decided to drop Swagger for Hidden Power Ice and used an updated version of his old Calm Thundurus from 2012. In fact, he totally retooled his 2012 winning team, ending up with a respectable top 16 finish. Aaron had to start building something new. He changed his previous offensive Cresselia to Trick Room, keeping bulky Thundurus. But as he tested more and more, he realized that with his Pokemon spending most of their time in Trick Room, Thunder Wave was starting to lose its luster. And so after several seasons of using bulky Thundurus, he dropped it for another ground immune water type, Rotom Wash, who offered extra firepower, Will-O-Wisp, and access to Light Screen in exchange for speed control. At first, Aaron was uncomfortable using Rotom, but as time went on, he was able to use its extra defensive capabilities to shut down teams. Aaron had an absolutely monstrous run through the 2013 World Champions, storming into top 8 in his first year in Masters, winning his first match and setting him on a path with Ryosuke Kosuge in what might be one of the most infamous sets of Pokemon ever played. You ask a VGC player about famous moments in the game's history, everyone knows that Sejun Park's Pachirisu is number 1, but 1 year before that, it was Aaron versus Kosuge, a battle to answer one burning question: is Swagger God? Looking at these two teams, you'll quickly notice that there's only one Pokemon different. Ryosuke has the Thundurus that Aaron had dropped for Rotom. There were a few other differences in the details. Ryosuke had an unorthodox Iron Ball Fling T-Tar as opposed to Chople Berry, and Aaron had Chesto Rest Cresselia instead of Citrus Berry. But the match really came down to the two electric types, and in game 1, Rotom Wash showed its value in a big way. Its water typing and Hydro Pump were big assets in dealing with Heatran, and Landorus constantly had to fear Will-O-Wisp even if it missed. So in game 2, Ryosuke adapted the one way he could. He brought Thundurus and he started clicking Thunder Wave and Swagger. From Aaron's side, what followed was one of the most unluckiest matches of Pokemon ever played. From Ryosuke's side, it was a beautiful pursuit of the win condition.
Still early, going to cut its speed and give it a chance to be unable to attack in the upcoming moves.
Game to help them aim a little bit better because they were losing turns mostly to accuracy last game, and I see that hasn't changed.
Yeah, and the Will-O-Wisp out from Rotom also are going to be avoided, but it is going to try for another Will-O-Wisp. Will it hit? No, of course not with that Will-O-Wisp. As the confused and paralyzed Cresselia is unable to make a move either. Roll the dice, try and make another move. Confused and paralyzed, but it hits itself in its own confusion as Tyranitar does get the Rock Slide. Oh, but another avoid! Double avoid! Heatran and Thundurus both avoiding Tyranitar's Rock Slides.
Scott Glaza, Nugget Bridge co-founder, one of the commentators of that match and Aaron's longtime friend, put it best in his What We Learned article after the event. Quote, "It isn't pretty, but Ryosuke is in the semifinals of Worlds. He has to do whatever he can to win, and I think he picked the highest percentage route to try to do that." End quote. Turns out when you put Thunderwave and Swagger together, well, there's always a chance. Ryosuke moves on to Worlds Finals, where he loses to Irrational Madi's Mamoswine, designed specifically to destroy Thundurus. In his team report afterwards, Ryosuke explained his choice to use Thundurus even with Trick Room, saying that it allowed him to manage speed control even when he couldn't get it up. As for Swagger, with no special attack investment in his Thundurus, Hidden Power wasn't doing significant damage to other Pokemon anyways, so he had to use Swagger. Turns out it paid off. As for Aaron, ever the good sport, he wrote in his team support that he had no regrets dropping bulky Thundurus for Rotom, even after the irony of losing it to the finals. And the name of that team report? Swagger is not God. All said and done, Thundurus Incarnate is on 3 of the top 8 teams at Worlds, including the runner-up and 3 more in top 16. It's the 4th most used Pokemon overall, and Hayden McTavish wins Senior Worlds with his own substitute prankster Thundurus. Swagger may not be God, but this Pokemon certainly is. And now for Therian. Thundurus Therian shares the typing with its Incarnate counterpart. Its stats and ability put it in an entirely different use case. This thing is built to do one thing: hit hard. As such, most players used it with a choice item, whether Specs or Scarf, and its movesets were adjusted accordingly. Volt Switch was a common option. Grass Knot was near mandatory for Tyranitar and ground types, and Hidden Power Flying was often the choice over Ice in order to further capitalize on stab and take care of grass type. Thunderbolt was the most common spammable stab option, but some players liked to use Thundurus in Rain, where Thunder was also viable. Remember how I talked before about Thundurus being a great Rain and anti-Rain mon? Therian ratchets that up to 11. As an anti-Rain mon, it's even more capable of eliminating Pokemon like Politoed. As an abuser of Rain itself, it hits harder, is better at removing grass types, and perhaps most of all, has an incredible ability in Volt Switch to keep its water type compatriots safe. It even matches up well into some opposing Thundurus Incarnate lacking HP Ice, who would take massive damage from a Thunderbolt and couldn't paralyze Therian back. Notable Therian users include William Biosci Hall, who won the online Winter Battle Tournament and came in second at the SoCal Regionals, Virginia 4th placer Simon Yip, Nintendo Korea Battle runner-up Kiwan Bay, and Nugget Bridge Invitational winner Blake Mr. Bopper Hopper. Thundurus also took home a pair of bronze medals at the European Nationals thanks to Matthias Helmut in Italy and competitor turned commentator Lee Provost in the UK. Every single one of these uses was on a weather team, and the Sand users wanted it to beat the rain teams. Therian only started to put up results without weather at Worlds, where Eugene Tan placed 8th in the LCQ by using Electric Gem Thundurus as a water type answer, and Jaime Martinez gave Therian its sole top 16 placement, finishing 15th. Nothing on Incarnate's level, but still pretty good.
Thundurus was an incredibly important piece of the X and Y OU metagame. It was a threat as always, despite Thunderbolt being nerfed from 95 to 90 base power and Hidden Power going from 70 to 60. For the second generation in a row, it brought immense value to any team due to its unique ability to check almost all offensive threats with its priority Thunderwave due to its prankster ability. This was invaluable against the monstrosities born of the mega-driven power creep, most notably the Dragon Dancer's Mega Charizard X, Mega Tyranitar, and Mega Gyarados. Greninja was no Mega, but it was potentially just as threatening, and oftentimes Thundurus and its Thunderwave were the only thing standing in the way of a Greninja sweep. It could not be emphasized enough how important Thundurus' T-Wave was. It was incredibly common, game-to-game sight for Thundurus to sacrifice itself so it could land Thunderwave on one of those boosted Pokemon, keeping them from running its team over. It could even T-Wave offensive Talonflame effectively, as it could live a boosted Brave Bird and would go first if Talonflame decided to go for Flare Blitz. This flying resistance was also key in holding off Mega Pinsir. Lastly, offensive Deoxys Speed, one of the premier offensive offensive threats in the metagame, couldn't revenge kill it without being crippled, a la Greninja. Now it may seem like Thundurus was used so much just to Thunderwave and die, but that was not the case. Otherwise people would have just used Klefki. Thundurus' excellent speed tier was as good as ever in the Keldeo and Latios influence metagame, letting it pose a threat in and of itself against opposing offense, since nothing like switching into its attacks, and it threatened just about everything that was being used. In addition to the aforementioned Pokemon, Mega Charizard Y and Landorus Incarnate were hugely notable Pokemon that Thundurus turned into offensive momentum, especially as it was actually quite a decent switch-in to most of Landorus Incarnate's attacks. Thundurus could also make use of a buff knockoff to totally destroy Latios from high health, while also crippling Aegislash and Stall Team's Chansey, making it far easier for a teammate to break through them. That fourth slot was fairly expendable and could also go to Nasty Plot, which alongside Hidden Power Flying instead of the usual Ice, would let it blow past Mega Venusaur and its Thick Fat, which would significantly open up one's own Keldeo. It also made it far easier to blow past Clefable. Thundurus was an absolutely defining XY Pokemon that was used on just about every single serious offensive team, due to its unique, incredibly crucial offensive and defensive properties. It was so good it was even considered ban-worthy by some players, however this never became a reality. Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire came out and Thundurus' Thunderwave wasn't as necessary anymore. The Dragon Dance sweepers were less common and Greninja was banned. Thundurus' Nasty Plot set didn't get the job done anymore either. The new Scarf Tyranitar-led Semi-Stall teams were major trouble for it, often forcing the Thundurus user to heavily play around it before being able to make any real progress. It struggled to find opportunities to switch in safely, since Ferrothorn and Heatran could easily stay in for a turn to put Thundurus on a timer. Clefable checked it, Tyranitar outsped it, and switching into Gliscor's hard-hitting facades wasn't easy, nor was even coming into Slowbro Scald. Between this struggle to switch in and the struggle to leave a lasting mark, Thundurus fell out of favor. Even its excellent anti-Keldeo and Latios offensive properties were generally outdone by the new Mega Metagross. Plus, eventually Weavile entered the fray, and that was really bad news. This isn't to say that Thundurus became unusable, far from it actually, as it was still a threatening Pokemon. It just had a much harder time being effective. It still saw some tournament usage from time to time, but its days of metagame domination were completely over. That said, the potential never left. Players mostly just stopped trying. If they were to play around with it again, they'd likely find that most teams tend to be quite vulnerable to a well-played Thundurus. For example, some players were wreaking havoc with an unorthodox yet effective Choice Specs Thundurus, and if that were looked into more, it could potentially reinstate itself as one of OU's bigger names again. So where was Thundurus Therian to be found if its incarnate form was running around? Well, at first the answer was UU, though that of course didn't last long at all because nobody was fond of 145 special attack, raining death down everywhere, and its 101 base speed was a lot more menacing there than it was in OU, meaning it had an easy time finding opportunities to crush everything in sight. So this basically forced Thundurus to look for any sort of niche in OU that it could get. Surely there was no hope, since speed is everything, right? Well, luckily, Volt Absorb meant Thundurus could shine on specific Blitzkrieg-paced, hyper-offensive teams, as it gave them an excellent way to stop Rotom Wash's Volt Switch in its tracks and threaten it back in return, something ground types couldn't do thanks to Hydro Pump and Will-O-Wisp, neither of which bothered Thundurus Therian too much. And since Rotom Wash ran physically defensive sets to handle Pokemon such as Talonflame and Mega Pinsir, it wouldn't take too kindly to eating a Thunderbolt from Thundurus T, making Thundurus an excellent partner to these Pokemon. Therian's higher special attack over its incarnate counterpart also made it reliable at beating up the common bulky teams. Clefable may be able to stand up to incarnate decently, but Therian absolutely blows it away, and as a result, its teammates were more easily able to pick up the pieces. This was a specific niche, but Therian was the only Pokemon that could fill it, and thus it had a genuine role in OU.
But before we continue, Thundurus isn't the only thing that brings the thunder, because this video is sponsored by War Thunder. I know, right? What a perfect sponsor for this movie. War Thunder is the most immersive and realistic vehicle combat game ever made. And I'm not just saying that either. The speed and the way the ships and tanks make turns while you're fighting other ships and tanks is exactly how I would imagine actually driving one of these behemoths. The graphics are amazing, and I love how much attention to detail the combat has, because there's actually no single hurt box with hit points to fire at. Each vehicle is intricately modeled down to individual components like engines, fuel tanks, weapons, and crew, which are all susceptible to damage. So you'll really have to hit the key points and strategize if you want to win. And as a competitive person, that makes things quite enjoyable. But also, War Thunder has the best of both worlds as a competitor and collector, because they have over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships of 10 major nations for you to collect and battle with. And you can join the worldwide community of of over 70 million players in awesome realistic PvP battles today by clicking the link in the description or pinned comment below to play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. And if you use my link, you'll receive a massive bonus pack for new players and returning players that haven't played for 6 months across all platforms. You'll receive an exclusive vehicle decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 silver lions, and 7 days of premium account. But be quick because this bonus is available for a limited time only. And thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to Thundurus. VGC players got a bit of a respite from Thundurus in 2014, where it wasn't allowed in the Kalos decks format, and I'm sure they were thankful for it because it returned with a vengeance in 2015. Despite several nerfs, Thunderwave lost the ability to paralyze electric types, gems were removed, and hidden power was made weaker. Thundurus persisted as one of the single best Pokemon in the format. As so often the case with the Gen 6 meta, looking at Thundurus' matchup against the most dominant Mega Pokemon tells a lot of the story. While the physical attackers like Kangaskhan and Mawile really hated being burned, they certainly didn't appreciate being paralyzed, and it was a death sentence for some frail special attackers such as Salamence. Thundurus' typing meant that both Megaments and Charizard Y had to fear it, especially Charizard, who was slower. Finally, as is ever the case, Thundurus does well when Landorus does well, due to their incredible synergy and its nice niche as a fast ice move user. Even with the nerfs to hidden power, special shoutouts also have to go to Thundurus for being able to priority taunt Amoonguss and turn it into a sitting shiitake just waiting to be sauteed. As you might have come to expect, Thundurus has too many placements to name. It won a ton of regionals throughout the year, it was often in nearly half of the top 8 teams, and the team reports of the time are filled with people talking about just how good it was. We'll highlight just the most important meta developments throughout the year. While most Thundurus were Citrus Berry, Barry Baz Anderson found a decent amount of success with a Life Orb variant as well. Well, first he won Europe's first ever regional level tournament with the Citrus Berry version. Then he switched to offensive Life Orb to threaten one-hit KOs on Charizard and won 4 premier challenges. Kelly Mercier White, the runner-up at these Arnhem regionals, put a rare Protect on his Thundurus over a second attacking move, using its status as everyone's most hated Pokemon to bait in double targets. Swagger went down in usage early in meta, since swaggering your opponent's Kangaskhan was not always ideal, but it found more use over Taunt as time went on, as players used it to combat especially offensive Aegislash and get around mental herbs on Trick Room setters. You could even use it to boost your own Lumberry holder, like Zach Drogokamp did when he got second at Missouri. Some players such as Washington Regionals runner-up Mark Hansen. Players would adjust their EV spreads depending on what teams called for. Need to live Mega Kang's double up? Bold, physically defensive. Scared of Gardevoir and Trick Room? Calm. Want to go fast and hit hard? Timid or modest? To give an example of just how much variety Thundurus had, let's take a look at 2 national level tournaments, UK Nationals and US Nationals. Going into UK, Thundurus I was the second most used Pokemon in the format, with most of them being bulky. Both the Thundurus and top 8 were Life Orb, but 4th placer Steven Gibbons was still bulky. Then you've got 3rd placer Jamie Boyd, who dropped a second status move for Nasty Plot and ran a super fast Thundurus that could one-hit KO most things in the format after a boost. Very cool. At the US Nationals, Thundurus ran the podium, with Toller Webb taking 1st, Rafael Bagara taking 2nd, and Blake Hopper taking 3rd. But all their Thundurus were different. Toller used a modest Thundurus, Rafael ran Calm, T-Wave, and Swagger, and Blake had Timid, making the meta call to go as fast as possible so he could taunt other Thundurus before they launched a Thunderwave. Thundurus was like a Mario Kart vehicle. Spec it out however you want, put whatever parts it needs on. By Worlds, more and more people were running fast and offensive Thundurus as an anti-meta call. And we're gonna say something we've said before about this World's top 8. We know it all looks the same, but these teams hide a wealth of details that set them apart, and Thundurus is a great example of that. Top 8 placer Daichi Kumabe as backup control to his Gardevoir's Trick Room speed control. It didn't have much special attack investment, but with its nature, it still dealt with rain boosting teams. Semi-finalist Yosuke Isagi also used Protect, but even without a special attacking boosting nature, dropped Swagger for hidden power. Then you've got the runner-up Hideyuki Taida, who might be the only Thundurus in history not to run Thunderwave. He was Life Orb Timid with 2 attacks, Taunt, and Protect. And finally, Shoma Shade Vieira Honami ran the most specially bulky Thundurus possible, and with safety goggles, guaranteeing he could forego Amoonguss's redirection and Spore. What's really notable about the Japanese players is that all of them put Protect on their Thundurus, something very few players had done beforehand, and given that it was almost a full Japanese top 8, you gotta think they were doing something right. With that, Thundurus manages a World Championship podium sweep and becomes one of only 8 Pokemon to win 2 World Championships at this point in history. As for our snaky brother, or dragon, whatever Therian is supposed to be, Gen 6 wasn't so much a power creep so much as a power sprint, and Therian, 10 speed slower, struggled to keep up. It had a hard time surviving the moves of other Mega Pokemon, and with their offenses so often loaded onto them, its lack of utility made it less desirable than ever. That said, there were still some Therians that showed up. Therian may be slower than Incarnate, but it's still faster than Landorus Therian, and so a few players used it as their Landorus check. Nicholas Lightcore Borgi used a Scarf version of a Mega Ments team for just this purpose to win 3 consecutive Premier Challenges in the very competitive New York region, and Jackson Famous Deaf Lakey also paired it with the Crescent Wing Dragon to come in top 4 at both Melbourne Regionals and Australian Nationals. Volt Absorb was a nice way to protect Mega Salamence from opposing Thunderbolts and Thunder Waves. The coolest use of Thundurus Therian, however, had to be on Jip's Snow-X team way back at the Arnhem Regionals, the first regionals in Europe if you remember. Jip ran a Life Orb Thundurus Therian alongside Heliolisk and Mega Sceptile, and the team couldn't have worked without Thundurus Therian specifically. You see, Heliolisk's signature move Electrify changes whatever move is next used into an electric type. Now sure, you could use that on your own team for a surprise electric move, but Jip used it on the opponent's Pokemon, meaning anything that undersped Heliolisk was suddenly firing off an electric move prone to getting sucked into Mega Sceptile's Lightning Rod or absorbed by Thundurus Therian. Thundurus itself also ran dual electric moves in Discharge and Thunderbolt, allowing it to serve as a backup battery for Sceptile. Jip managed to top 8 Arnhem with this truly unique strategy, and with Prankster, it really wouldn't have worked. As it would happen, Jip's use of Lightning Rod was a bit of a foreshadowing for 2016. Thundurus' first foray into a restricted meta was an unfamiliar landscape, full of new threats. Thundurus did perform well against Xerneas, who very much did not appreciate it being taunted before Geomancy, or paralyzed after getting Geomancy up, but it could only do minimal damage to both Mega Rayquaza and Primal Groudon, and it couldn't even paralyze the latter. And while electric type coverage was nice to have in a meta where Primal Kyogre was widely accepted as one of the strongest restricted Pokemon, the meta also was populated with redirection to ensure that Kyogre could stay safe. And yet, as always, on-demand paralysis was just too good to pass up. The Mega Pokemon were still around to work in tandem with the restricted duels, and guaranteed speed control only facilitated the power of your team more. This is the part of what always keeps Thundurus relevant up to this point. Sure, its firepower may be dwindling in comparison to other Pokemon, but its role as facilitator means that as power levels grow, it becomes even more valuable to make sure you're going first, and a 25% chance that a turn on the Razor's Edge goes your way. You can see why it's attractive. In terms of moveset, the biggest way Thundurus changed was that Protect became much more common, taking notes from the Japanese players the year before. Trainers started using it to keep their support from being a free target, especially in a meta so filled with spread moves. And so despite everything, Thundurus had one of the most successful seasons yet. Nihal Noor won the Melbourne Regionals, Alex Gomez won UK Nationals, Arash Almaty won the German Nationals, Javier Senorena wins the Italian Nationals, but even astonishing than the mass of the first place hardware was the sheer density of Thundurus at these events. Some quick stats for you. At the UK Nationals, Thundurus is on 6 of the top 8 teams and 22 of the top 32. Almost 70% of all top 32 teams. It's not uncommon at this point for more than 50% of the top 8 teams to use Thundurus, but we can see a trend start to build as we follow the timeline. German Nationals saw it at 5 out of 8 and 19 out of 32. Then in Italy, it's at 4 out of the top 8 and 12 of the top 32. Then in the US, only 2 of the top 8 and 11 of top 32. These are still incredible stats, and we have to acknowledge regional influences as well, which kept Thundurus at 75% top 8 in Australia, for example. But you can't deny these numbers are going down. Lightning Rod users like Raichu and even the rare Mega Sceptile were on the rise, but players were also figuring out other ways to pack speed control into their teams, like Talonflame, Crobat, and one of the biggest nuisances to Thundurus of all, Bronzong. Bronzong's propensity for Trick Room and a Mental Herb was problem enough for Thundurus, but on top of that, quite a few of them were running Safeguard, leaving Thundurus with a Pokemon it did minimal damage to and couldn't stop from doing anything else. In other words, a gigantic problem. Come Worlds, Thundurus had more problems to face down than ever before, especially once you take into account that the team that Wolf Glick, Marcus Statter, and Barris Ockles piloted, populating 3 out of 8 of the top 8 with both a Safeguard Bronzong and a Lightning Rod Raichu packing Nuzzle to boot, rendering Taunt useless. Electric moves subject to redirection and protect. Well, hey, if you want to protect every turn, good for you. I'm exaggerating a little bit. Thundurus still found its way onto 2 of the top 8 teams that year, but the players who utilized it made sure they knew exactly how they wanted it to function. Baz Anderson finally managed to cut top 8 worlds after having missed out by 1 spot a few years prior, with a Thundurus specifically designed as a Crobat counter. Prankster Taunt was a huge boon in stopping Tailwind, and perhaps more importantly, the opposing hazes that would remove his Xerneas' boosts. Future world champion Eduardo Cunha made his way to the top 4 off of a prescient prediction that worlds would be full of Ray Ogre. This was nominally one of the best matchups for Thundurus, who could paralyze both Pokemon, taunt Rayquaza before its Swords Dance, and launch Thunderbolts into Kyogre. But in the end, he faced against Jonathan Evans' double Primal team, which had a niche counter of its own, Manectric, who packed Lightning Rod before Mega Evolving. For all the power creep and doubts about Thundurus, it still managed to find its way onto 2 separate teams into the top 8, had a stellar 2016 season, and maybe most incredibly, became one of 2 non-restricted Pokemon ever to make a World's top 8 every year was allowed, along with fellow World stalwart Cresselia. And if that isn't a testament to its competitive longevity, I don't know what is. Thundurus Therian saw a bit of play after Worlds, even winning a regional in Dortmund thanks to Matthias Sutrodolski, a nice capstone to a year that, while it didn't feature another Worlds win, was pretty impressive all things considered. Oh, and as for Thundurus Therian, yeah, this thing did not do anything in the GS Cup. Them's the breaks.
Thundurus had a rough time in Pokemon Sun and Moon, mostly due to the existence of Tapu Koko. Koko had better defensive typing, which allowed it to more easily switch in, especially because it could stick around with Roost, and it provided important utility other than fast electric type offense, such as Defog and of course electric terrain. Speaking of electric type offense, Tapu Koko was also better at it than Thundurus, despite its lower special attack stat, thanks to its higher speed, most notably outpacing Greninja, as well as its typing making it easier for it to get on the battlefield and actually get attacks off, especially since it wasn't crippled by Stealth Rock. Nature's Madness was also a more reliable method for breaking tough defensive Pokemon such as Magearna, Megalodios, and Tapu Bulu. Nobody was thinking about Thundurus when Koko existed, and for good reason. You'd just be making things a lot harder for yourself for just about no real benefit. Tapu Koko even fully countered Thundurus for good measure. Unfortunately, Thundurus couldn't eke out a new home in UU either, as it was far too powerful there, mowing through everything with nasty plot boosted Z moves off of its tremendous speed stat, while still having Prankster Thunderwave to stop any Mega Aerodactyl revenge kill attempt. Thus, it was stuck in the awful limbo of borderline, not seeing any usage in OU because players know it'd be a total waste. As for Thundurus Therian, it was once again far too powerful for UU and reprised its role from the last generation to a T. It was more key than ever since there was a lot more Volt Switch going around. In addition to Rotom Wash, there were also Magearna and Tapu Koko, spamming it like there was no tomorrow, and Iapapa Berry let Thundurus take their attacks, which was especially crucial when trading blows with Koko, as well as keeping Thundurus out of range for a possible Kartana revenge kill, which was quite useful since Thundurus did resist Kartana's stab moves. Therian's extra special attack made a significant difference. It would smash through the ever-present Tapu Bulu, Assault Vest Magearna, and Megalodios that endlessly troubled Incarnate Thundurus, and as a result, it was able to easily leave holes in the common bulky teams, providing the opening its teammates needed. For the first time, Therian was the better Thundurus, a nice change of pace.
VGC players got to take a bit of a break from Thundurus again in 2017, but this time it turned out it was an extended vacation. Not satisfied with the adjustments they had doled out in Gen 6, Game Freak hit Thundurus with an absolutely massive nerf in Gen 7. Thunderwave was reduced to 90% accuracy, and Paralysis as a whole went from 75% speed reduction to 50%. This is a huge nerf. It means that Tailwind mons even out on speed after being paralyzed, and is what puts a dent in Thundurus' previously infallible, reliable speed control. Oh yeah, Swagger got nerfed too. And not to mention, Dark types were now entirely immune to Thundurus' naughty prankster ways, which, if you know what's around the corner in 2018, you'll understand why that ain't great. What's more, the meta was not kind to Thundurus. After years of being the unchallenged king of the electric types, Thundurus had another electric legendary to contend with, Tapu Koko, who provided terrain control, functionally higher electric damage, an in-demand fairy typing, and an incredible speed tier. The other Tapus also posed big threats. Tapu Lele put a pin in any priority moves, including prankster boosted moves, while Tapu Fini entirely negated paralysis. And then came Incineroar. If there was any Pokemon to usurp Thundurus' crown as the king of utility, this was it. On top of being prankster immune, Incineroar provided oodles of utility. Not the same type as Thundurus, sure, but an overwhelming amount nonetheless. And so Thundurus, struggling with Incineroar, fighting against Lele and Feeny, made obsolete by Tapu Koko, finally faded into the background after years as one of the most dominant Pokemon VGC has ever seen. And that's where we ended our last script on it. And then Gen 8 happens, and oh boy, keep watching for that one.
So Thundurus didn't appear in Generation 8 until the Crown Tundra, but as soon as it showed up, it instantly started ripping things up as always. However, neither form was much for OU. Sure, Tapu Koko's electric terrain had seen a nerf, but it was still excellent, and Zapdos had received an absolutely incredible buff in the form of Hurricane, providing it superb coverage on a ferocious secondary stab, especially since it could hit ground types with it in the wake of the Hidden Power removal. With its superior bulk and roost, it was much better at taking advantage of the newly added heavy-duty boots as well. Now, despite being generally outdone by Zapdos, Thundurus Therian found some use on rain teams, as it became incredibly scary when bolstered by its newly gained Weather Ball. Zapdos could use this as well, and was generally a better choice because of its better defensive profile as well, as already having the very dangerous Hurricane being 100% accurate under the rain. But Thundurus T's Volt Absorb was absolutely enormous for helping rain stifle Zapdos and Tapu Koko, two of the most annoying Pokemon for them to face. Thundurus T's superior speed stack could come in quite handy as well. Its niche in OU was just that, niche, but it was a legitimate one. However, both Thundurus forms were more at home in UU, and for Thundurus Incarnate, maybe even a little too much. It used a set of Thunderbolt, Psychic, Knockoff, and U-Turn, equipped with heavy-duty boots so it would avoid damage from Stealth Rock and stick around for most of the battle. Add in its ability Defiant to thoroughly punish the plethora of Intimidate, Defog, and King Shield in the tier, and you can see why it was an utter terror, especially with its amazing speed tier, giving it the jump on an enormous portion of tier, such as Nihilego, Cobalion, Keldeo, Mienshao, and Zarude. Your options for outspeeding Thundurus Eye were quite limited. Starmie, Raikou, Azelf, and Noivern were the only non-Scarf options, while Thundurus' electric typing let it shrug off Scizzor's Bullet Punch, and none of these Pokemon really wanted to switch into Thundurus to begin with. Yes, not even Raikou wanted to eat a knockoff. This meant that most of the time, you were switching a slower Pokemon into Thundurus, and those didn't do much better either, as they were easily ruined by the endless vortex of knockoff and U-turn. Thundurus' influence on the tier was as negative as it was significant. The prospect of beating it over the course of an extended game was downright unreasonable, given how easily it was for it to get a free switch in and proceed to harass or outright destroy pretty much the entire metagame. As a result, Thundurus Incarnate got banned from UU once again. After its Incarnate counterpart got axed, Thundurus Therian took over and proceeded to dominate the tier. Its tier highest base special attack was on full display alongside its great speed stat, letting it consistently rip through metagame staples regardless of what was in the tier or popular at the time. While having a stab Thunderbolt to reliably shred Celesteela, Crobat, Skarmory, and Primarina, Thundurus also had all the tools to slice through would-be electric checks like Tapu Bulu, Roserade, Hippowdon, or Excadrill, as it learned Sludge Bomb, Psychic, Grass Knot, and Focus Blast. Honestly, there was nothing Thundurus T didn't have the potential to destroy, and that of course wasn't all. Its incredibly strong Volt Switch made it a great pivot while still hitting the opponent for damage. Knockoff was great utility and removed any chance Assault Vest Tangrowth had of checking it, and Thundurus T even had valuable defensive utility that provided it switching opportunities between its resists, speed stat, heavy duty boots, and of course its ability, Volt Absorb. All these excellent options and power were just from its pivot set though. It still had access to Nasty Plot, which let it slice through defensive answers even more easily, while against offensive teams, it could just spam attacks. Thundurus Therian was also considered to be potentially broken by the player base at one point, and its tier status went to a vote, though it managed to avoid the ban hammer, as its speed tier, while great, did make it just barely manageable for several of the staples that its incarnate form had once outsped. All in all, Thundurus Therian capped off another superb generation of UU for Thundurus. And to cap it off, Thundurus Therian even had a small yet significant niche as a wall breaker and sweeper on sticky web offense in Ubers. Though such teams had no shortage of offensive threats to employ so as to abuse the speed drop, Thundurus T's vicious electric stab was excellent in tearing through staples like Kyogre, Yveltal, and Necrozma Duskmane, while plowing through the most common electric resist around, Eternatus, with Psychic. Why Thundurus T over Zekrom, you ask? Well, one big reason is because Thundurus T destroyed Groudon and Ferrothorn with total ease, and another is because Thundurus T didn't need to hope Duskmane didn't run Earthquake in order to set up freely all over it. It was a limited niche, but a worthwhile one, bringing Thundurus back to Ubers for the first time ever since Pokemon X and Y.
Here's the thing, by the time Thundurus became legal in Sword and Shield VGC, both Tapu Koko and Incineroar were both available and allowed. Series 7 opened the floodgates to all Pokemon you could find in the Gen 8 games other than the restricted mons, and so you have to wonder, with Thundurus' biggest competition still available, how did it possibly manage to become relevant? The answer lies in two completely new places, its physical moves and the ability Defiant. Incineroar was still the most used Pokemon in the entire game, and so it was hard to justify using Prankster, but Thundurus' hidden ability Defiant was actually a perfect Incineroar counter. Now I know what you're thinking. Isn't Thundurus a special attacker? How is it going to make use of an attack boost? Thing is, Thundurus actually has a respectable attack stat at 115, only 10 points below its special attack. It was its move pool that had prevented it from being a viable physical attacker for so many generations. With so many Thundurus relying on hidden power for coverage, it had no reason to ever go physical, especially since its only physical flying moves were Fly and Sky Drop. But Gen 8 took what was once one of Thundurus' biggest weaknesses and turned it into a strength. In case you're not familiar with the Dynamax meta, Max Airstream is widely agreed upon as the best Dynamax move in the game. It's a team-wide speed boost without the base power drawbacks that come with Max Knuckle or Max Ooze. With a move set of Fly, Wild Charge, and a fighting move like Superpower, Defiant Thundurus became one of the best Dynamax options in the game, able to dissuade Intimidators, dole out boosts to its physical buddies, and even do some respectable damage. The downside was that Thundurus was only really viable as a Dynamax user. Without Dynamax, it packed lackluster moves behind just okay attacking prowess. Its real strength came from the selection of its max moves and ability to help its team. Any physical attacker could appreciate having Thundurus on its team, but the ones that really loved being paired with it were the ones who functioned really well outside of Dynamax themselves, like Urshifu and Rillaboom. Thundurus was a very interesting mon in this regard. It supported its teammates by attacking. It's kind of like speccing your Dark Souls character to be plenty good at all things instead of min-maxing them. Thundurus was good support, but not really a support mon. It did respectable damage, but it wasn't your sweeper. It just managed to do both these things pretty reliably at the same time. Players were pretty split evenly between Life Orb and Assault Vest. Life Orb was an obvious choice because of the reduced HP cost in Dynamax, where Thundurus would be spending most of its time, and it left the last move slots available for Protect. Assault Vest, on the other hand, would keep Thundurus boosting his moves for as long as possible, and Thundurus didn't necessarily hate running a dark move in its last slot. It made it useful alongside special partners as well because of the drop on opponents, and Foul Play could keep it doing relevant damage outside of Dynamax. Thundurus was a somewhat common sight throughout Series 7, as evidenced by results such as Tommaso Benedetti's 4th place in the Victory Road Tundra Challenge and Bing Jie Wang's qualification run in the Players' Cup 2 qualifiers. In fact, 5 players in total qualified for Players' Cup 2 with Thundurus: Bing Jie in North America, David Kodish and Marcus Sponholz in Europe, and Caleb Waijizenha and Will Tom in Oceania. The flip side to that, only Caleb used Thundurus in the actual Players' Cup, and he went 13th, losing both of his matches. Thundurus still had stiff competition for its role. Other flying type users like Galarian Moltres and Landorus were around, and it wasn't even the most common electric type. That honor had to go to Regieleki, who still offered speed control with its blistering fast electro webs and hit harder to boot. But Series 8 gave a little bit of a pick-me-up to Thundurus as competitive VGC embarked on its first ever solo restricted meta. Thundurus now had to contend with all the problem Pokemon it had back in 2016, but if you remember from back then, it actually did pretty well. It was still a great Kyogre counter, and in fact, Thundurus' reliance on Dynamax became one of its biggest strengths. See, quite a few of the best restricted mons didn't like Dynamaxing every match because of their spread moves. This was true of Groudon, Kyogre, and both Calyrex forms. So having a Pokemon that did want to make use of Dynamax was nice, especially if you couldn't Dynamax at all. Say if you were the best Pokemon in the entire format, like Zacian. Zacian and Thundurus made quite a pair. Thundurus could boost all the stats Zacian wanted, keep it immune from Spore, dodge the ground type moves that threatened it, and handle Zacian's worst matchup, Kyogre. And then Zacian would just go to town, doing the things that so convincingly earned it the place as Gen 8's top dog. Thundurus shot up in usage and started winning tournaments, including multiple of Victory Road's repeating circuit tournaments, which had come to serve as the online replacement for tournaments in COVID times. Thundurus won 4 out of 5 Winners Circuit qualifiers, thanks to Victor Medina, Flavio Del Pidio, Matteo Agostini, and Manuel Barea. The first 3 used Assault Vest variants with Zacian, although Flavio Del Pidio yanked a book from Regieleki and chose Electro Web over Foul Play, giving Thundurus some of the old speed control it had. Manuel Barea chose an Iron Tail variant alongside Calyrex Shadow Rider, giving his restricted speed and defense boost as it powered up with its own broken ability in As 1. At the Winter Circuit finale, Matteo Gini gave Thundurus a 6th place finish as its peak. Not quite as high as it had done in qualifiers, but still a far cry from the depths it had sunk to. These winter qualifiers also saw a callback to days of yore. John Hugh, always known for his innovative sets, brought a bit of a vintage fashion to the fore with Prankster Thundurus, but with some new tools. While Thunderbolt, Thunderwave Taunt, and even the safety goggles had all been seen before, John packed Eerie Impulse, a new tech designed to shut down big special attackers like Kyogre and Caloric Shadow. With a priority method to drop their relevant attacking stats by 2 stages, Thundurus could be a huge nuisance for these super powerful restricteds to deal with. But there was one other reason Prankster Thundurus made a resurgence. You see, Gen 8 changed the way speed calculations work so that they take effect as soon as they happen, instead of after the turn is done. What that means is that priority Thunder Wave will now immediately cut a Pokemon's speed in half, and even with the nerfs to the move, that was pretty tempting. Thundurus continued to lurk throughout Series 8 as a definite meta threat, but not quite one at the top echelon it had occupied prior. That said, it was on 3 qualifying teams for Players Cup 3, and Alberto Daza took his wheezing Gigas team all the way to top 4 in the tournament, with his Assault Vest Thundurus serving as an alternative Dynamax user and Intimidate deterrent for opponents. Series 9 abruptly yanked restricted Pokemon back out of the play pool, and early predictions held that Thundurus' usage would decline as it was no longer useful to help out Zacian and counter Kyogre. While players in this series often opted for Regieleki as their electric type of choice, Thundurus still found itself serving as one of the primary Intimidate deterrents on other builds. Funnily enough, one of those builds was Sand, which Roberto Parente and Giuseppe Alario both used Thundurus to take top 3 finishes at the Victory Road Spring Circuit qualifiers. It's funny, many years after Thundurus had found its way onto Sand teams as a rain counter, it was still buddying it up with Tyranitar and Excadrill, albeit serving a totally different purpose. Thundurus even managed to perform well in several other Players Cup qualifiers. Jonathan Barades qualified using it on a Sun team in Latin America, and 4 separate Asian players qualified for the Asia Players Cup with Thundurus: Ing Shu Chung and Sam Ing Si Sum in Hong Kong, Cho Sung Xia in Taiwan, and Brian So with Prankster Thundurus in Singapore. Cho and Ing ending up piloting their identical Sun Stack Attacka teams with Thundurus to 5th place finishes in the Asia Players Cup. But the best performance came from Fevzi Ozkin, who took 3rd place in the Players Cup 4 with his Blastoise and Registeel team. Again, Prankster showed its worth here. Eerie Impulse was capable of slowing down teams enough for Blastoise to do residual damage, and for his Iron Defense Registeel to become nigh unkillable. The dual restricted GS Cup meta would be the format that players would use for the 2022 World Championships, the only World Championships for all of Sword and Shield. With more time to prep than before and the return of in-person tournaments, players worked through the meta in rapid fashion, and from the word go, Thundurus proved it could still hang. Jesus Jimenez won the 500-person Victory Road X GG Tour Series 12 challenge with a fairly standard Defiant AV Thundurus, except for the fact that it used Brick Break over Superpower, a nod to the increased presence of Grimmsnarl with screens. But just below him, Kyle Geffner placed 3rd with Safety Goggles Prankster. Jesus used Zacian Palkia, and Kyle opted for Caloric Shadow and Groudon. I'll say it now because I have more important stuff to talk about at the end. Thundurus steering got a small bit of a spotlight here too, largely off the back of Rain's importance. Francesco Deanna used it on a Zacian Cali S team to place 7th in the Victory Road GG Tour Made Challenge, while Terrence Dre took it into the Rain himself to place 3rd at the Thailand Regionals with Dialga Kyogre. But Thundurus was thriving. It was viable in multiple archetypes with multiple abilities to consider. With 2 restricted Pokemon to manage, odds were high you wanted at least 1 big physical attacker, and that's where Defiant found its niche. Odds were also that your opponents had 1 big special attacker, and that's where Eerie Impulse showed its weight in gold. An April metagame overview from Victory Road put Thundurus' popularity into an easy to understand context. In CP awarding spots, it appeared once in Brisbane, twice in Salt Lake City, and 11 times, including 3 in the top 8 in Liverpool, setting a clear trend and being the most used non-restricted Pokemon in the latter tournament's higher standings, except for Incineroar. This thing was always scary because you didn't know what ability it was packing, and the 2 did almost opposite things. You might notice that the Liverpool was an outlier for Thundurus usage. That was also the birthplace of what would become known as French Rain, as pioneered by silver medalist Thomas Gravouille. Thomas had a fairly standard core of Zacian, Kyogre, Incineroar, and Kartana, and then Shedinja in the back that could win games entirely on its own or give risk-free switch-ins. Thomas used Thundurus to shut down Kyogre, Zapdos, Palkia, really any special attacker that couldn't hide behind an Indeedee. As you should expect by this point, his 2nd place finish with Prankster was followed up by Ben Grismer's 3rd place finish with a standard Life Orb Defiant build that made Zacian and Caloric Shadow go fast and hit hard. Thomas went on to win the Lily Regionals with the same team, where fellow Frenchmen Florian Henry and Hippolyte Bernard also steered that squad to top 8, and even then, they were less than half of the Thundurus users in top 8. A regional with 7 Thundurus in the top teams is just like old times. Thundurus racked up top 8s and tournament wins around the globe, resuming its old place as a rain facilitator and counter, which is pretty important if you got Kyogre around. Alistair Sandover won Perth, Emilio Forbes won Secaucus, Won Seokjun won the Korea Trainers Cup, Ko Sukide won the World Cup Open. Thundurus was back on top, baby. And I know I've done this a couple of times, but once more, just to demonstrate the depth of this mon, in the beginning of June, Pan Si Ming won Hong Kong regionals with Prankster Thundurus, but this was unlike any other. This Thundurus had no attacking moves at all. It went Thunder Wave, Taunt, Eerie Impulse, and Scary Face as its last move, a second form of speed control that bypassed Lumberries or type immunities like Groudon. Then 2 weeks later, James Evans, former senior world champion, wins the North America International Championship with Life Orb Defiant Brick Break, becoming only one of those aforementioned wins to do it without Zacian, since he ran Groudon and Calyrex Shadow. At Worlds, it was as if nothing changed. 3 Thundurus users make top 8, Megan Rattle with Sharp Beak of all things, alongside her Zacian and Kyogre, Calvin Foster with Assault Vest Crunch on Zacian and Calyrex Shadow team, and Eduardo Kuna pioneers one more change by dual attacking Life Orb Thundurus, sacrificing a fighting slot for Taunt to shut down Follow Me users, Amoonguss, and any setup from pesky Zacians. 3 Thundurus, 3 different items, 3 different movesets.
Both Thundurus forms made their Generation 9 debuts through the release of Pokemon Home. Thundurus Incarnate dropped to RU. What a mind-boggling concept. But then again, Gen 9 has brought incredible power creep through its min-maxing of new Pokemon, and that has led to Thundurus Incarnate not feeling too out of place in RU, even sharing the meta alongside former OU Titan Tyranitar. But then again, it's not like Thundurus Eye is just another Pokemon in the tier. It's excellent, being an electric type that can slam Wo-Chen with a powerful U-turn, as well as generally being irritating with knockoff to harass just about everything that would want to take its powerful stab moves, made Thundurus Incarnate a top tier Pokemon, especially because of its astonishing speed, and it could even terrestrialize into a pure electric type to give itself an immediate power boost to finish games that much quicker. However, with the release of the Indigo Disc, Thundurus Incarnate has a decent niche in UU to one of the tier's best Pokemon, but Thundurus itself has dropped to NU, though whether it remains there is rather uncertain. It's quickly established itself as a top tier threat, even though the metagame is quite specially bulky, featuring Pokemon like Snorlax, Sylveon, Goodra, and Umbreon. Thundurus has been proving itself to be capable of ripping through just about anything, even the Pokemon meant to check it. It ranks among the other very best Pokemon in NU, and though a ban doesn't seem likely at this time, Thundurus is known to wreak havoc once players explore it sufficiently, and with terrestrialization, the options are endless. Thundurus Therian, on the other hand, is still dead set on demolishing UU. With Weavile and Meowscarada hanging out at the top of the tier, out-offensing Thundurus Therian isn't unreasonable, but taking it on defensively, forget about it. Its Volt Switch is as terrifying as ever, and most switch-ins like Iron Treads, Sandy Shocks, or even your own Thundurus Therian can all be taken out by the appropriate coverage. Even Clodsire, one of the best special walls, isn't a perfect counter as it gets hit hard by Psychic. The only thing really holding Thundurus Therian back, competition from Sandy Shocks, who has similar defensive typing alongside identical speed, a better stab combination, and the ability to support its team further with both Stealth Rock and Spikes. That said, Sandy Shock's coverage is far worse, and it can only set up with booster energy. It could never compare to the classic agility and nasty plot brutality Thundurus Therian can bring. Thundurus Therian also loves running a Choice Spec set, which terrestrializes into a flying type and Terra Blasts literally everything. No immunities there. With the release of the Indigo Disc, Meowscarada and Weavile ceased to be UU, but the metagame also became more hostile to Thundurus Therian, with the dominance of Latios, Garchomp, and Garganacl, not to mention Zapdos offering the same typing as well as being better suited to take on the metagame, superior bulk, and access to Roost. Still, Thundurus Therian offers a viable alternative, but whether or not its usage will be maintained to remain UU is questionable. It's likely that we'll see its first foray into RU at some point, which will no doubt be hilarious destruction. All in all, both Thundurus forms have certainly been knocked down a few pegs, but they are still continuing to succeed in Generation 9.
Thundurus became legal at the very tail end of VGC 2023, but to look at the tournament results, you sure wouldn't know it. In a metagame full of Iron Hands, Goldango, and the Dark-type treasures of Ruin, Prankster Thunderwave simply wasn't hitting like it used to. Fast threats like Shiyu and Xianpao were totally immune to Thundurus' preferred form of speed control, while Pokemon like Ting-Lu shrugged it off completely. For once, Tornadus was the preferred genie due to its guaranteed tailwinds. Thundurus was almost completely off the radar for all of 2023. Its lone hero was Joe Ugarte, who managed to place 19th at the 2023 Worlds as the lone Thundurus player in Top Cut, although most people might have taken more notice of the fact that he was the lone Wo-Chien player in Top Cut. Joe's Thundurus was a bulky supportive set that fit into Joe's theme of damage mitigation, which he could stack via Wo-Chien's Tablets of Ruin and Snarl, Landorus Therian's Intimidate, and Thundurus' secret weapon, Eerie Impulse, a move that neutered opposing special attackers. With the opponent's weakened, Thundurus was free to fire off its new special toy, fresh from Legends Arceus, Wild Bolt Storm, an inaccurate move with huge damage and utility upside due to its 20% paralysis chance, something that could even affect the opposing dark types. 80% accuracy is rough, but Joe's team was designed to extend games, meaning more chances to land his attacks. If opponents were feeling threatened by Thundurus, Joe outfitted it with a Rocky helmet, perfect synergy with Eerie Impulse, making physical attackers think twice about touching the genie. The 2024 metagame saw some increase in Thundurus usage, but it was still rough. Even as the treasures lost their shine, Thundurus had new problems to deal with, namely a resurgent Incineroar and a new upstart electric type, Raging Bolt. Those players who did use it indexed into its utility, following Joe's lead with the Eerie Impulse tech. Rain teams featuring Archaludon often included Thundurus as a secondary weather setter to buff Electro Shot, and some players even turned the weather the other way, bolstering photosynthesis teammates and fire types like Entei. Instead of Rocky Helmet, many players started using Covert Cloak to thwart opposing fake out attempts. But even with all the various utility that Thundurus offered, its proponents struggled to make it work at the highest level. Thundurus might show up in the results page of a tournament, but always just outside of Top Cut. Only a few enterprising Europeans were able to give it the type of glory it was used to, and through very different methods. You might remember Hippolyte Bernard as one of 2022's French Shedinja disciples, which was a team that used Thundurus in all its iterations. Hippolyte put that experience to good use at the Bologna Special event, one of the largest tournaments of all time at 898 players, and managed a 4th place finish in the single restricted meta. Hippolyte took advantage of the fact that so many of the top restricted Pokemon, Calyrex Shadow, Miraidon, and Terapagos, were special attackers, meaning Thundurus' Eerie Impulse was even more valuable than before, especially because Hippolyte was running a Terra Fairy Draining Kiss Calyrex Shadow that very much appreciated the damage reduction. Combined with Taunt, Thundurus was capable of shutting down the popular redirection plus special attacker strategies in the format. As Hippolyte demonstrated in his top 8 match, fellow Frenchman Adam Sherfewi also placed 14th with the same team. And then there's Jamie Boy. Jamie also used a special attacking mitigating tactic, Assault Vest. Wait, you say, Assault Vest on a Prankstermon? Well, that's the thing. Everyone else was using Prankster regular Thundurus, but despite declaring that he had been washed up for years, VGC's biggest iconoclast was getting top 4 at a regional with Assault Vest Thundurus Therian. This was back in Regulation E. Thundurus Therian had less than 1% usage in the entire format, but Jamie Boy has always looked at Pokemon in terms of unique pieces they bring. As he said in his video, he just wanted a strong special attacker that was off the ground, and Thundurus Therian is the strongest special attacker off the ground. Jamie knitted out his Thundurus with bulky EVs, Assault Vest, Terra Flying, Terra Blast, Grass Knot, and a choice of electric moves in Wild Bolt Storm and Thunderbolt, a set designed to stick around, fire off powerful moves, and dodge the ground type attacks that might hit his Hisuian Arcanine and Goldango. Shoutouts to Terra Flying Volabzorb, meaning you didn't lose anything from dropping your electric resistance. This team helped Jamie Boy break a 4-year Top Cut drought and qualify for Worlds in typical Boyd fashion. That is to say, totally atypical. And that's it. So how great was Thundurus actually? Well, its first generation and a half, its incarnate form was the bee's knees, being too good for its first OU metagame and one of the most important pieces of the next. Unfortunately, it died down significantly after that and never became bad in Gen 6, just more difficult and less intuitive to use in the shifting metagame, as opposed to before.
Unfortunately though, Tapu Koko erased all hope in Generation 7 and 8, outclassing Thundurus entirely in OU. This was especially devastating since Thundurus was deemed too powerful for UU, kind of leaving it in a limbo state. On the other hand, Thundurus Therian hasn't been quite as consistently elite, apart from the immensely defining presence it had in Black and White 2, but it's carved out significant niches for itself several times over the generations. Thundurus also had a small amount of Uber's appearances in various guises.
As for VGC, Thundurus was one of the most defining Pokemon for years and years, to the point where one top player quipped that the only way to beat opposing Thundurus was with their own Thundurus. Overall, the Electric Genie has been a pretty terrific Pokemon. As a reminder, please check out our sponsor, War Thunder.
And that's that, another False Swipe Gaming X Agency collab. We hope you guys enjoyed. We had a total blast making this video. Shoutouts to FSG as always for having me on the channel. It's always a good time here. Definitely go stop by my channel. Check it out if you're into competitive Pokemon. Mainly post singles content. And yeah, what can I say other than we'll see y'all soon with some amazing content. Take care.
And thank you so much to our Platinum tier patrons. Thank you so much to Raven Daytona Ring, Sorazan Croxon, Stoneface Colin, Bingleton, Ray Ray, Daniel Isbeast, Glitcherton, Alex Sabo, Funky, Skylaria, Jack G, and Chika Chihyo for their support of our videos.